So as you all know, I do this all the time, comparing different MIDI keyboards. I have compared the Minilab Mark II to the MPK Mini Mark II, but since the release of the MPK Mini Mark III, people have been blowing up my inbox and my comment section asking, trying to make the decision between these two keyboards now that AKAI has updated theirs. So today we're going to look at the differences between the two, and I'm going to point out some pros and cons of each so you can make your decision if you're deciding between these two keyboards. Today's video is going to be sponsored by Skillshare, and if you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is TAETRO, your electronic music mentor. Alright, first things first, before we get too deep into it, if you enjoy live electronic music performances, tutorials, and content to make you a more productive producer, you should click that subscribe button down below. I've recently been getting into making more sample packs, which if you haven't yet, you should check out my Smog sample pack, which has some really cool sounds in it, and I'm going to be making more soon in the future. Also doing live streams, beat making with all different types of controllers. As you can see from behind me, I have lots of gear, and showing you how to make stuff with all this gear, which is the most important part. So if you're into all that, subscribe to the channel, and I promise I won't let you down. For now though, let's get into the comparison of these two keyboards. So at surface level, you can see there is a bit of a size difference. Actually, let's go ahead and lay the MPK right on top of the Minilab. You can see that's a sizable difference, no pun intended, which will affect which controller is best for travel, right? So a bigger, bulkier controller is a lot harder to throw in a backpack. Even though these are both mini controllers, clearly the AKAI MPK Mini has a size advantage when it comes to portability. Also, I'll just say that the Minilab Mark II is a bit heavier, which actually, if you are interested in traveling with the controller, that's a problem. But if you are interested in a more robust build quality, the ARTURIA Minilab definitely has more of a solid feel, and it's actually got a metal bottom, which is interesting. Solid construction, I never feel like I'm gonna break it. If I do throw it in the bag, I definitely don't feel like I'm gonna break it. AKAI MPK Mini, on the other hand, is made of pretty much all plastic, but it is a heavier plastic. It doesn't by any means feel cheap. On the surface level though, we can see that these are kind of similar keyboards. They both have keys, pads, and knobs. There's a few different things they do differently and a few things that are similar. For instance, let's start by talking about the knobs. Now on both controllers, these actually aren't just knobs. They don't have start and end points. They're endless encoders, meaning if you spin them, they will just keep spinning. There's no stop and no end to them. Just keep spinning, which is great because with MIDI controllers, we want to bounce around and control different things in our DAW. We don't have specific knobs locked to specific parameters all the time. So if I go from controlling, let's say, a volume and I want to bring it from 0 to 100, great. But now if I want this same knob to be the reverb on something else, I can just jump right in. It's an endless encoder. It picks up where the software left off. But of course, what you'll notice is there are only 8 endless encoders here on the MPK, and there are 16 here on the ARTURIA Minilab, which I would consider an advantage for sure. Not only that, these two knobs right here, knobs 1 and 9 on the ARTURIA Minilab, actually have some added functionality that we'll talk about a little later, but they're not just knobs that you turn, they're actually buttons, if you can hear that little click. And those are things that you can MIDI map, but they also work within some of ARTURIA's software, which, like I said, we'll get into later. So that's the knobs. Let's go ahead and talk about the keys and the key action. With the AKAI MPK Mini Mark III, they actually completely redesigned their keybed and made a significant improvement from the Mark II. So the keys actually feel really good. No complaints there. Like I said, it's a big improvement from the Mark II. It's pretty comparable to the Minilab Mark II. But what I can say, and this is hard to convey in a video, is that the Minilab Mark II's keybed just feels slightly smoother, and that's obviously personal preference type thing, and that's based on how, my feel of the controllers. I don't know what it is about the ARTURIA Minilab's keys, but I have always held them in the highest regard when it comes to mini keyboards. Even their full-size keyboards have really, really quality keys. So I might prefer the Minilab's keys, but just by a hair. I don't think it's a big enough difference to make a buying decision. But I think that some of the features we're about to talk about when it comes to the pads, the workflow functionality, and the software bundle that comes with these keyboards, I think that is something that will teeter you over the edge one way or the other. But before we get into talking about those details, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for creatives where millions take the next step in their creative journey. They have thousands of inspiring classes that can help you discover a new passion or learn a ton of stuff about photography, videography, music production, and more. A Skillshare premium membership is under $10 a month and you get access to all of the classes on Skillshare. But today, for a limited time, if you use the link in my description down below, you can get a free trial of the Skillshare premium membership. I've been leveling up and learning from Young Guru. He's got a Learn to Mix Your Music class, which is great for those of you who feel like you have your musical ideas down and you're making great beats, but it's just not matching up to the quality you're hearing on Spotify or Apple Music. If you're more interested in music theory, they've got music theory taught within a DAW like Ableton Live, which is the DAW that I use, by an Ableton certified trainer. You can't really beat that. The classes are taught with a combination of video instruction and class projects, so it's a great way to keep yourself motivated when you're independently trying to level up these skills. So take advantage. For a limited time, you can use the link in my description to get a free trial of a Skillshare premium membership. But for now, let's get into talking about some features of these keyboards that I think will sway you one way or the other when deciding between them. I think the endless encoders, it's fine that the Minilab has 16 and, it beats out the MPK, which only has 8. The Arturia also having the clicky buttons, which we mentioned, but I don't think that's a huge deal breaker. I don't think people are begging for more knobs, but if you are, and the Minilab is the way to go. But there are some other features in here. One mainly being that the MPK Mini here has a arpeggiator built in. And of course there comes all sorts of controls with that built-in arpeggiator. Being able to change the rate, being able to change the direction, adding octaves, and there's of course a tap tempo button for you to get right in sync there, and using AKAI's software editor for the MPK, you can actually make it so that the arpeggiator syncs with your DAW. Now, I would compare this to the arpeggiator on the Minilab Mark II here, but unfortunately, there is no arpeggiator on the Minilab Mark II here. So that is a significant difference between the two. If you are interested in having an arpeggiator, the MPK Mini is the way to go. That said, most DAWs, like I use Ableton Live for instance, have built-in MIDI arpeggiators that you can just put on any track so that regardless of what controller you're using in your software, you can have an arpeggiator. Another difference between the two keyboards is the way they handle pitch and mod. So on the AKAI MPK Mini here, we've got a joystick. You can tell that it totally messed with that setting so that the 0 position is that really harsh tone now. I'm just not a fan of the joystick and how it behaves with different plugins and even just within Ableton Live. You can just be a lot less accurate with it. And when you're moving across the x-axis here, it's very hard to not also change values in the y-axis. Meanwhile, on the Minilab, we have pitch bend ribbon here, or touch strip I should say. And I like that because if I place my finger right in the center here, there's basically no change, but if I just so subtly move my finger, I can get pretty natural bends, which I really like. And then a second touch strip here for mod. And what I like about this is I can find a spot and then leave it in that spot, right? I went to the center, or I brought it down, it's all the way down, and I know where I am. Here on the y-axis on the joystick, it just always returns to that center point. I can't leave it anywhere. Touch strip here, I can find a location that I want, and boom, we're there. Both of these controllers have a sustain port, and as you can see just looking at these controllers, they each have 8 pads. Now, this is one of the biggest factors, I think, for choosing between these keyboards. The AKAI MPK Mini has 8 MPC pads. These are the same pads that they put on the proper MPCs. That's what AKAI is quoted as saying. They are backlit, but only when you touch them. You can see that red there. If I switch to a drum kit, it basically means that it will light red behind the pad, which is a nice look. It's nice to have some light feedback there. What you'll see on the ARTURIA MINILAB, however, is that I have customized the color of these pads, which you can do using Arturia's editor, and depending on what pad mode you're in, the pads will be different colors. So I've just happened to customize these colors to show off the color customization, but you'll also notice when I play a note, there is some LED feedback there as well, with the pads turning like a white pinkish color when I touch them, which is nice. When it comes to pad sensitivity though, I think they start to diverge and go different directions. The MPK Mark III is the newer controller. The MiniLab is showing its age a bit here with its pad sensitivity. I don't know how to best demonstrate this, but the feel of the pads on the MPK Mini Mark III feel, just a bit more sensitive than they do on the Arturia MiniLab. Also, the bigger pads on the MPK, the bigger surface area you have, obviously the more accurately you can play. However, on the MiniLab here, they're a bit smaller, which makes them not more difficult, but it's just harder to play accurately when you have a little bit smaller pads. But that's not all the MiniLab's pads have to offer. And, technically with the AKAI MPK, we can push this CC button right here, and instead of playing drums, I can map these to different DAW functions, right? Like play and stop, etc. But those are custom mappings that you have to make for yourself. The MiniLab, however, has built-in Ableton Live functionality, which is my main DAW of choice, which gives me a little bit of bias towards the MiniLab because the AKAI MPK Mini is really lacking any sort of workflow functionality, and I've mentioned that in previous videos. Here, if I hold Shift and I go to pad 8, I'm basically changing programs for the pads. And what you probably see there is one illuminated pad, and that's because I have a clip in my Ableton session, as you see here. So that's matching up with my Ableton session. So if I play this clip here by letting that clip play, you can see that it's green now to indicate that it's playing. Now let's say I wanted to record an additional synth layer. I've got a synth loaded on track 6. I'm going to record a new clip on track 6. You see that I was able to loop there and create a new clip within Ableton Live. Definitely didn't play that perfectly in time, but nonetheless, on the fly there, without touching the computer, I was able to create a new clip and loop a new synth line by using the Arturia MiniLab's pads because it gives us session clip functionality built right into the keyboard. This is great for workflow and streamlining your process. Another cool function is that when you're in this session mode, these two knobs actually help you navigate around Ableton Live. So this top knob here actually allows me to scroll through tracks, as you're seeing. So I can just go right along and get to a different track. And then this knob below, knob 16, helps me go down scenes. So let's say I wanted to go ahead and try that clip again. I can go ahead and go to track 6, make sure I'm in the second scene. And let's say, oh, I want to do it in a lower octave. So let's go ahead and record that. Gives me a count in. Let's do it. And there I've got a quick clip recorded, and I could just keep on doing that. So I'm navigating around my DAW, I'm able to launch clips, record new ideas, loop things. It's a functionality that you're not getting on the MPK Mini. Now, of course, if you don't use Ableton Live, none of that matters to you, and that's your choice, but it is a big difference between the two. They really put in a lot of thought in the MiniLab into workflow functionality for Ableton users. Couple quick mentions for clarity. They both, of course, have additional pad pages. So even though there's only 8 pads on each of them, if we go ahead and hit bank A or bank B on the MPK, we get an additional 8 pads. And then we also have a pad button up here. We go from pad 1 through 8 to pads 9 through 16. So again, another set of 8 pads. You notice the AKAI MPK Mini has a screen, and I haven't mentioned it much, and that's because, well, I don't do much with it at all, and it doesn't really serve me that well anyway. Because here's the thing. I guess it could be helpful if I didn't have a laptop screen, but I do have a laptop screen, and I can just look at it. Now, say I didn't want to look at the laptop screen, sure, I could look down at only the controller, but I have to look at the screen anyway to know what I'm going to be controlling, unless I've mapped them. So the screen is nice, but it's not the big leap forward that it seems to be. Of course, it's nice to have a screen, but I wish there was a little more information on it, or maybe it was a little bit bigger to have more information on it. I'm not sure. Of course, I didn't mention that the knobs will line up to macros in Ableton Live. So I've got my basic audio processing rack here, and you can see that the 8 knobs will completely match up with the knobs on screen. Same goes for the ARTURIA MINILAB, which previously in the past, the endless encoders had some trouble on the MINILAB, but they updated it with a firmware update, which I did a video on, which completely fixed that. I want to talk one more thing in regards to these 2 controllers, and that is the bundled software. Okay, so both of these keyboard controllers come with software, so you can start making music right away, right out of the box. I have my preferred software bundle, but before I talk to you about that, I'll let you know which one I actually prefer. So the AKAI MPK Mini Mark III actually comes with AKAI's own free DAW called MPC Beats. Now this is a limited version of their MPC software for the computer, but nonetheless, it is software by AKAI that has great integration with the MPK Mini, and you can start making tracks right away with it. It also comes with some MPC expansions, so you get a few more sounds with that bundle, Air Hybrid, and Mini Grand. They call this the Complete Music Production Starter Kit, and it very much is that. The ARTURIA MINILAB Mark II comes with Analog Lab Lite, which is a collection of plugins from Arturia. They have really great vintage modeled synths and things like that included in their full Analog Lab. But in Analog Lab Lite, you get a limited selection of those synths. They're great sounds. You get Ableton Live Lite, which is a limited version of Ableton Live. And you get Grand Piano Model D, a really nice sounding virtual piano. Now, I said I had a preference between those two, and being that I'm an Ableton user, I do have preference to the Ableton Live Lite bundle that comes with MINILAB Mark II. And here's why. You don't see a lot of producers using MPC software on the computer. It's not my favorite workflow, having used both MPC and Ableton Live, though I've used Ableton Live much more. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the MPC Beats software. I'm sure you can still do a lot with it, but if you're going to be learning and growing, you might as well start learning and growing on a DAW you can grow into. And I think it's probably more likely, if you're into this stuff, that Ableton Live is going to be the direction you want to go as you get more and more into this stuff. You just don't see a lot of pros necessarily using the MPC Beats desktop software. You see a lot of pros using MPCs, no doubt about it, but the desktop software, not so much. You see a lot of professional folks using Ableton Live, and if you want to be in that tier, I would just start learning it as soon as you can, even though it might seem a little more complicated. Also, the Analog Lab Lite. Let me just talk about that for a moment, because I think it's another advantage of the MINILAB Mark II. Now, on my computer, I've got the full Analog Lab here, so it's not Analog Lab Lite, but I will talk about how this keyboard syncs up so well with Analog Lab. If you remember talking about pages and how this works with Ableton Live, if I hold Shift and select the first pad here, you can even see the label of Analog Lab here on the keyboard. And you can see that the lights change and even some of the knob functionality changes. What I've got on my screen here is you can see that I can scroll through and select different presets. I can scroll through and figure out, what do I want to search by? Do I want the Mellotron instrument? Sure, I want Mellotron. Let's keep searching. I guess that's fine. And let's scroll through the Mellotron presets and boom. I'm switching through just like that. You'll also notice a set of macro knobs here. My knobs here, my endless encoders here on the MINILAB have adjusted to reflect that. So it's just a layer of functionality that isn't really in the MPK Mini. I mean, sure, the MPK will sync up with its own DAW, you know, MPC Beats, and it'll sync up fine with like macros in Ableton Live and even external plugins. But when you have a company like Arturia who makes really awesome synth plugins, sound plugins, even audio effects, when they've got a hub like Analog Lab that fully syncs up with their controller, it's definitely a workflow advantage. So that's something to consider there. Now again, if you're not an Ableton user, either of these controllers are fine. They both have certain ways of syncing up with most DAWs. Like pretty much any MIDI controller now will sync up with most DAWs. I mean, the AKAI MPK Mini, if you go to Program Select, I can select a bunch of different stuff. Logic Pro X, FL Studio, GarageBand, Chroma Pads. So there's a lot of selection here for DAWs that it has functionality with. I wouldn't say that necessarily the MiniLab has programs you can select through. Like obviously it doesn't say FL Studio right on here. It's got the Analog Lab mode, it's got the Ableton Live Session mode, and then it's got some pages in between that you can custom map to your preference. But like I said, regardless of your DAW, you can make either of these controllers work. It's just a matter of if some of the features that I mentioned previously sway you one way or the other. But for now, I think that's about it. Let me know in the comments down below if I missed anything, if I missed any features you think folks should know, if you have one of these controllers, why you love it, and if you were swayed in going one way or the other and for what reason on one of these controllers. I would love to hear your thoughts. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe for more live electronic music performances, tutorials, and content to make you a more productive producer. This has been TAETRO. Have a good one.